Cole Hargrove walked into the conclave chamber, and the first thing he noticed was how quiet it was. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that happens when 300 people hold their breath at the exact same moment and none of them wants to be the first one to let it go. The chamber was built for moments like this one. The ceiling climbed so high that you stopped trying to find the top of it. 7 delegation platforms curved in a half circle, each one glowing in the color of its species. Screens covered every wall and broadcast the session live to the rest of the galaxy. The Galactic Council had been running this same room, this same format, for 400 years. They were very good at it. Cole did not look impressed. He was 51 years old. He was built like someone who had spent his 20s doing hard physical work and had never quite stopped. His official file at the Council registry listed his occupation as diplomat. Delegate Sorvin of the Veth Consortium, who had been reading species across 6 centuries, looked at that word and thought, that is the wrong word. Not a lie. Just wrong for whatever Cole Hargrove actually was. Lena Farrow walked in 2 steps behind him. Younger. Quieter. Still in a way that looked like calm but was something else entirely. The Council had made the mistake, watching the pre-session footage, of assuming she was the one actually running things. She had let them keep that assumption because it was useful. She found her seat in the back row of the human platform and looked at the cut crystal water glass sitting in front of her. It caught the light and threw it in small pieces across the table. She thought, for no particular reason, about how easy it would be to break. The session opened the way these things always opened. Long formal titles. Greetings exchanged in 3 official languages. A reading of the agenda. Cole stood at the center platform and waited. He did not fidget. He did not look around the room at the alien faces watching him. He fixed his eyes on a point somewhere above the head of the lead council speaker, and he waited the way something geological waits, without urgency, without doubt. The council speaker was a tall gray-skinned Veth named Daros. He read the terms in a clear voice. The Zavari Dominion had filed a formal territorial claim on 17 human colony worlds. The grounds were unauthorized expansion into contested space. The Zavari wanted the worlds transferred. The Council had reviewed the claim and found it procedurally valid under galactic law. Humanity was invited, as a courtesy, to negotiate the terms of the transition. Every species in that room had heard a version of this speech before. It was how things worked. Someone pushed. Someone else weighed the cost of pushing back against the cost of giving in, and they gave in, and there was a treaty, and there was a kind of peace, and the galaxy moved forward. That was the system. 400 years old, and it had never failed. Cole let Daros finish reading every word. Then he stepped to the podium and set a single data chip on its surface. It made a small sound. In that silence, it sounded like the beginning of something. He said, "We've reviewed the Council's terms." Daros nodded. Ready for the counteroffer. Ready for the list of demands that would begin the real conversation. Cole said, "We're not here to negotiate." 3 translation matrices flagged the sentence as a parsing error. The Kethara delegates turned to each other and murmured. Sorvin did not move at all. He sat very still and watched Cole's face and said nothing. Cole reached forward and activated the data chip. Earth's formal declaration spread across every screen in the chamber. It was not a list of grievances. It was not a protest filing. It was not a request for mediation or review or any of the 100 procedural tools the Council had spent 4 centuries perfecting. It was a declaration of war. The Zavari head delegate stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor and the sound echoed through the whole chamber. Several observers in the upper gallery began talking at once. Daros said something in formal Veth that the translation system rendered as, "This is not the established procedure." Cole looked at him. He did not argue. He waited for the room to quiet. It took a while. When it did, Cole read the declaration out loud. His voice was level the whole way through. No anger in it. No performance of any kind. He read it the way a man reads something he has already made peace with, in a room full of people whose opinions about it will not change the outcome. The declaration was short. Shorter than anyone in that room expected from a species that was supposed to be asking for leniency. It said that the 17 worlds were human territory. That the Zavari annexation was an act of aggression under any honest reading of the law. That Earth did not recognize the Council's authority to transfer human worlds to any foreign power. And that humanity was, from this moment, in a state of war with the Zavari Dominion. One of the Kethare delegates asked, through his translation unit, whether humanity understood what it was saying. Cole looked at him. Yes, he said. The session came apart after that. Not formally. It just dissolved. Delegates talking in urgent low voices to their staff. Feeds being rerouted. Emergency procedural motions being filed in real time by species that needed to put themselves on record before the next hour passed. The grand machinery of galactic diplomacy grinding into a gear it almost never used. Cole picked up the data chip. He looked back at the platform. Lena was already on her feet. She smoothed her jacket. She walked out beside him without a word. In the corridor, Cole's aide, a young man named Pete Garland who had never been off Earth before this trip and was visibly processing the last 30 minutes, fell into step on his left and said, "They're going to call an emergency session tonight." Cole said, "Good." Pete said, "What do we do now, sir?" "We go home," Cole said. "We get to work." Pete was quiet for a moment. Then, "And the Council? What do we tell them?" Cole stopped at the end of the corridor. He looked back through the long glass panel at the chamber, where 300 beings were still trying to process what had happened. He watched them for a moment. Something in his face that Pete couldn't name and didn't try to. "Nothing," Cole said. "They heard everything they need to." He pushed through the door toward the docking bay. Lena followed without comment. Behind them, in the chamber, Sorvin had not moved. He was still in his seat. Everyone else had cleared out, to side rooms, to communication suites, to wherever delegates went when the world stopped making sense. Sorvin sat alone in the half-dark and looked at the screen where Earth's declaration was still displayed. He had brokered 43 treaties. He had sat in that room through every kind of crisis the galaxy could produce. He had watched species bluster, weep, demand, collapse, and make promises that ranged from sincere to catastrophic. He thought he had seen every way a species could walk into this chamber. He had not seen this. Not the war itself. Not even the declaration. Those were unprecedented, but they were, in their way, understandable. A species backed into a corner, making a desperate choice. He had observed that before. What he could not understand was Cole Hargrove's face while he read it. Not angry. Not afraid. Not performing pride. Not desperate. Something else. Something that sat behind the eyes and did not need the room's agreement. Something that had already settled the question long before the question was asked out loud. Sorvin sat for a long time after the lights dimmed to standby mode. He opened his report interface. He was supposed to file a behavioral assessment of the human delegation. He wrote 3 different drafts. He deleted all 3. He closed the interface and looked at the stars through the chamber's high window. He thought about a species that had looked at the oldest political body in the known galaxy and said simply, without drama, without anger, no. And meant it. And was already going home. And was already working. The emergency session was called 3 hours after Cole Hargrove's shuttle left the station. Sorvin sat in his usual seat in the second ring and watched 37 delegates speak, one after another, all of them saying different versions of the same thing. This cannot stand. This must be addressed. This is without precedent in 400 years of council history. What do we do? Nobody had a good answer to that last one, and the session ran 4 hours past its scheduled end without producing one. The Zavari representative was not the head delegate. He had been pulled back to Dominion space within an hour of the declaration. The man in his seat was a junior official named Vreth who had been handed the worst assignment in the galaxy on 4 hours' notice. He sat stiffly and read a prepared statement. The Dominion considered the declaration illegal. The Dominion was filing a formal countermotion. The Dominion remained confident in the Council's ability to resolve this through established channels. Vreth read all of it, and when he looked up from the page, just for a moment, the expression on his face was that of a man who knows exactly how something sounds and cannot do a single thing about it. Sorvin filed that look away. 11 light-years from the station, Earth's Second Fleet was running final readiness checks in the dark. Admiral Nate Calloway stood on the bridge of the carrier Ardent and looked at the fleet arranged across his tactical screens. 22 ships. Not the largest force the Zavari Dominion had ever faced in their long and generally comfortable military history. But Nate had been studying Zavari tactical records for 4 years as part of a project that existed mostly in his personal files and partly in the heads of a small team that nobody outside it knew about. For years of close reading. For years of watching the same pattern repeat across 60 years of Zavari engagements. They always expected the other side to hesitate. Every battle in the record showed the same beat. The moment of pause on the opposing side. The recalculation. The second guessing that opened a window the Zavari were extremely good at moving through. It was not a flaw in their strategy exactly. It was a reasonable assumption, built on experience, because every species they had faced had hesitated. That was what species did when the moment arrived. Nate had already done his thinking. He had done it 4 years ago and then spent 4 years checking his own work. All ships, he said to his comms officer, set course for the Ardennes corridor. His XO was Dana Reeves. She was compact and precise and ran tactical like a person who had already thought through every bad outcome and had a plan for each one. She had reviewed the same Zavari records. She knew what the Ardennes corridor meant. She did not comment. She turned back to her screens and began coordinating the formation with the focused attention of someone who has moved past the decision and is now just doing the work. On Earth, Senator Ray Caldera was in his office at midnight looking at casualty projections he had requested 3 days ago and now wished he hadn't. He was not a warmonger. He had voted against the declaration. He had given a speech about it that the feeds had covered widely and that had not changed a single thing. Now he ran appropriations because someone had to, and the numbers on his screen were the honest kind, the kind that don't soften anything and aren't trying to. His assistant knocked and came in with coffee. Ray took it without looking up. He drank it while it was still too hot. He looked at the projections again. He turned back to the budget line items. He stayed until 4 in the morning. On Kepler Outpost 7, one of the 17 claimed worlds, technically Zavari territory now under the Council's ruling, Corporal June Vasquez was pulling her second consecutive watch shift because 2 of her people had gone sick and there was nobody to fill the gaps. She was 23. She had been stationed on Kepler 7 for 8 months. She knew every sound the outpost made at night, every loose connector in the perimeter fence she had put in 3 repair requests about. Nobody had fixed it. She read the declaration on her handheld while walking the perimeter in the dark. She read it twice. She put the device in her pocket and kept walking. 2 days later a Zavari administrative shuttle landed on the outpost's pad. One official came down the ramp. He was not military. He was the kind of person who processes paperwork, who files transfers, who makes the administrative side of power look routine and bloodless. He had a tablet and a formal transfer order and the expression of someone who expected this to be simple. June was at the gate. He looked at her. She opened the gate. She said, "You're going to want to leave." She said it the way you'd point out that someone had parked in the wrong spot. No edge in her voice. No shift in her posture. Just information, offered plainly, to someone who needed it. The official looked at the outpost behind her. He looked at the sky. He looked at June once more. He turned and went back up the ramp. The shuttle lifted. June watched it until it disappeared into the cloud cover. Then she pulled out her handheld and radioed Calloway's fleet. One word. Clear. Back at the council station, the Kethare analyst the strategic committee had commissioned stood before the full chamber and presented his updated numbers on human military capacity. He walked through the data point by point. Fleet tonnage. Current readiness levels. The rate of production at Earth's shipyards, which had been running triple shifts for the past 72 hours. The historical rate at which humans escalated when they had decided to escalate, drawn from their own internal conflicts over the past 3 centuries. The room went quiet. Not the shock quiet from before. This was something slower and more careful. The kind of quiet that moves through the body differently. Sorvin watched each delegate reach the same understanding at slightly different moments. These numbers had existed before the declaration. Humanity had walked into the conclave chamber carrying this capacity and had not mentioned it once. Had not gestured at it. Had not used it as leverage for a better settlement, which it absolutely could have secured. A YEF delegate leaned close to Sorvin and said, "Lo, they had this the whole time. They could have gotten almost anything they wanted from the Zavari just by showing these numbers." Sorvin said, "Yes. So why didn't they?" He thought about Cole at the podium. The level voice. The short document. The way the man's face had held the same expression from the moment he walked in to the moment he walked out. "I don't think it was about getting something," Sorvin said. The YEF delegate looked at him. "Then what was it about?" Sorvin looked at the capacity data still glowing on the chamber screens. "I think," he said, "it was about saying something." He did not try to explain further. He wasn't certain he could. That night he wrote one real line in his behavioral assessment. He looked at it for a long time. He saved the file and went to his window and looked at the stars. He thought about Kepler Outpost 7. He thought about a young soldier in a perimeter post who had opened a gate and said 4 words and meant every one of them. He thought about Cole Hargrove reading a declaration in a room full of people who expected something else and not once adjusting his pace to the room's discomfort. He thought about Ray Caldera alone in an office at midnight with numbers he didn't like, doing the work anyway. He thought, "I have spent 600 years believing that every species, at the edge, chooses survival over principle." He stood at the window for a long time. Then he went to his desk and added a second line to the assessment. He read both lines back. He closed the file. He did not sleep well. The Ardennes corridor barely showed up on military maps. It was the kind of place that existed for commerce, not combat. Shipping routes. Supply lines. The Zavari Dominion had been running freight through it for close to 2 centuries and had long since stopped thinking about it consciously, the way you stop thinking about a road you drive every day. Infrastructure doesn't feel like a weakness until someone treats it like one. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was not knowing that a group of civilians on Earth had been watching those roads for 11 years. Not analysts. Not intelligence officers. A private club of ship enthusiasts based in a mid-sized American city who had found Zavari freighter patterns interesting and had documented them carefully for their own satisfaction, the way some people track weather systems or the migrations of birds. Their records were thorough. Their maps were more detailed than anything in Nate Calloway's official intelligence briefings, which is why he had been using them as a supplementary resource for the past 4 years without telling anyone. The Zavari ships stationed at the Ardennes corridor were not in a combat configuration. They had no reason to be. Nobody fought here. This was supply chain territory. Administrative space. Nate Calloway's fleet dropped out of FTL at 0400 and arrived from an angle that did not appear in any Zavari defense model. The positioning was exact. Not aggressive exact, where you charge in and trust your numbers. Precise in the way a surgeon is precise, each ship placed to close off a different route before the Zavari had finished processing what was happening. The Zavari flagship captain would say later, in debrief, that by the time his crew identified the human formation it was already too late to respond meaningfully to it. He said this without excuses. He was a professional. He understood that he had lost before the engagement began because someone had done 4 years of homework that he hadn't known to do. Dana Reeves ran the engagement from the Ardennes Bridge. She was calm in the specific way of a person who has already thought through the bad outcomes and knows what to do in each one. She gave orders in a steady voice. The crew responded. No wasted motion anywhere on the bridge, no scramble, no fear loud enough to touch the air. 31 minutes into the engagement, Dana targeted the Zavari flagship's engines. It was a choice she had made before the fleet left dock. Every doctrine in the Zavari military record prioritized hull strikes. Hit what destroys the ship fastest. Remove the enemy's capacity. Do it efficiently. It was a logical approach and she understood the logic. She had still chosen engines. Engines meant the crew survived. She had done the math on what the other choice cost, not in tactics but in something harder to put in a spreadsheet, and had found it not worth it. She gave the order in the same voice she used for everything else. The gunners executed it cleanly. The engagement lasted 40 minutes total. When it ended, the corridor was under human control and the Zavari supply chain that ran through it was severed at its center point. The flagship drifted dark, waiting for recovery. The crew was alive. Nate stood on the bridge and looked at the after-action data coming in. He absorbed it line by line. He noted 3 names on the casualty feed, 3 of his own, from a ship on the outer formation that had taken a hit during the first exchange. He stayed with those names for the length of time it took to say each one quietly to himself. Then he told his comms officer to move the fleet to the next objective. He sat down and wrote his after-action report. 4 sentences. He sent it and looked at the tactical display and started planning. In the drifting flagship, Zavari Admiral Zeth Koran sat in the emergency lighting and reviewed the engagement data on a backup terminal. He had won 9 battles. He knew the shape of a loss, knew the specific moment when the math stopped favoring you and the decision became about minimizing damage rather than winning. He had hit that moment in the Ardennes engagement at the 4-minute mark and had known it clearly. What he kept coming back to was the engine targeting. He had fought 9 battles. He had studied the records of 200 more. In every engagement he had ever reviewed, from every species, the first priority was hull strikes. That was universal. That was doctrine built on common sense. These humans had shot the engines. His crew was alive because of it. He sat in the dark with that fact and could not figure out what it meant exactly. It was not mercy in the way he understood mercy. It was something more practical than that and also, somehow, more unsettling. He filed a note in his personal record. He did not know yet what category to put it in. In the Council's surveillance suite, Sorvin watched the engagement footage 3 times. He watched it the way you watch something you need to understand before you can figure out what it tells you. On the 3rd viewing he focused specifically on the human fleet's formation discipline. Not a single ship broke position across 40 minutes of live combat. In every engagement Sorvin had observed across his career, across every species he had studied, there was always a break somewhere. One crew making a survival calculation that diverged from the collective plan. It was not cowardice. It was just the honest arithmetic of individual self-preservation. It happened every time. It did not happen here. He wrote 2 sentences in his assessment report: the human fleet maintained complete formation discipline across the full engagement. This is the first instance of this kind in our recorded military observations. He stopped. He looked at those 2 sentences. He added a 3rd: recommend updating our behavioral models for this species immediately. He closed the file and sat back. In a small break room on the Ardent, Dana Reeves sat alone after a shift. She had eaten something out of a foil packet without tasting it. She was looking at the wall. There was a minor display panel there with a crack across one corner from the engagement's vibration shock. Nobody had fixed it yet. It showed a frozen section of the tactical map, a still image from 37 minutes in, when everything was still moving very fast. She had a folded piece of paper in her jacket pocket. Before the engagement she had written 3 names on it, statistically, because she had known there would be names to write and she had wanted to write them before rather than after. She had been 2 off. There were 3. She didn't take the paper out. She sat and looked at the cracked panel and breathed. After a while, one of her junior officers knocked on the open door. He looked at her and started to say something. She could see on his face that he was trying to find the right version of it. She saved him the trouble. "I know," she said. "Go eat." He went. She sat a little longer. Then she put her food wrapper in the bin, smoothed her jacket, and went back to the bridge because Nate's next objective needed tactical coordination and that was her job and she was very good at her job. The Zavari Dominion released no public statement for 18 hours after the Ardennes corridor engagement. When it came, the statement was measured and formal and said very little of substance. In the private channel Sorvin had cultivated over decades of careful relationship building, the Dominion's internal communications were considerably less composed. He read them carefully. Then he opened a private line to a senior contact in the Kethare government. He said, "You need to read the Ardennes numbers. And then you need to think carefully about where you're standing." The contact said, "Are you advising us to distance from the Dominion?" Sorvin said, "I'm advising you to read the numbers and make your own decision." He closed the channel. He looked at the tactical footage still open on his screen. The human fleet, clean and still in formation, moving to objectives that someone had spent 4 years mapping in their spare time. He thought, they were ready before they walked into that chamber. He thought, the declaration was not desperation. The declaration was a door being opened from the inside. He turned off his screen and went to file his updated report. He wrote it this time without deleting a single word. 3 weeks into the war, the Zavari Dominion stopped calling it a correction. They had used that word in the first public statements: correction, adjustment, response to illegal aggression. Controlled language from a government that was used to controlling things. But after the Ardennes Corridor, after 2 more engagements in the outer systems that produced results the Dominion had not modeled for, the word correction quietly disappeared from their official communications. What replaced it was silence, mostly. And behind the silence, in the channel, Sorvin continued to monitor with the patience of someone who had been doing this for a very long time, something that sounded like genuine recalculation. The Council's member species had noticed. 2 governments that had publicly endorsed the Zavari territorial claim contacted Earth's liaison office within the same 48-hour window, both asking to clarify their positions. The phrasing was almost identical. Sorvin read both messages and thought about what it meant that they had used the same language. It meant they had talked to each other first. It meant the calculus was shifting and they wanted to be on record as having started shifting early. He filed that observation without comment. In an office on Earth, Senator Ray Caldera was in his 12th consecutive day of 12-hour sessions. The appropriations work was the kind of work that did not get easier with time, it just became more familiar in the way of a weight you carry long enough that you stop noticing the ache until you sit down. He had stopped eating lunch at his desk and started eating at the small table by the window because his doctor had said something about posture that he had half listened to and was now half implementing. His assistant, a young woman named Carrie Doyle who had been with his office for 2 years and had the specific resilience of someone who had never once brought a personal problem to work, knocked and came in one afternoon with a tablet showing the latest engagement summary. Ray read it. He set the tablet face down on the table. He looked out the window at a gray afternoon. He said, "How many?" Carrie told him. He nodded. He picked up his fork. He ate the rest of his lunch. He was still voting on budget line items 2 hours later. He had not spoken much in between. On the hospital ship Meridian, which had been repositioned to the edge of the conflict zone 3 days after the Ardennes engagement, Nurse Pam Ochoa was in the middle of hour 19 of a shift that was scheduled to end at hour 12. They had received a new transport 4 hours ago. The Meridian's beds were full in the way that hospital ships in active conflicts get full, which is to say quickly and without much warning and with a logic that was hard to argue with because it came from math. Pam had a patient in Bay 7 named Cal. He was 26. He had come in with a leg injury that was serious but manageable and with a particular kind of worry in his eyes that she had learned to recognize. He kept asking about his squad. About 3 names in particular, the same 3 names every time she checked on him, asked in the same order like a prayer he was running through to make sure the words still worked. She told him his squad was fine. She had stopped looking up whether this was true. She had made that decision somewhere around hour 8 and she did not revisit it. She checked his vitals, adjusted his 4-line, told him to sleep, and moved to the next bay. She was very good at the moving. In the council chamber, Sorvin had requested a private session with Lena Farrow. It had taken 4 days to arrange. Lena arrived without staff, which surprised him, and sat across from him in a small conference room with bad overhead lighting that buzzed faintly in a frequency his translator unit kept trying to process. He had prepared for this meeting. He had thought carefully about what to ask and in what order. He said, "We believed you would negotiate." Lena looked at him. Her hands were folded on the table. She said, "We know." He said, "The system has worked for 400 years. No species has refused it." She said, "The system works because the other option looks too costly. You make the math look impossible and people accept the framework. And the math didn't look impossible to you." She looked at her hands for a moment. "The math looked exactly as costly as it is," she said. "We just decided cost wasn't the only variable." Sorvin sat with that for a moment. He said, "What do you want from this? What would make your government stop?" Lena was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "The 17 worlds back. A formal acknowledgement in the council record that what the Zavari did was illegal." And for the Dominion to understand, she stopped. She picked up the pen sitting in front of her and set it back down. For the Dominion to understand what the other option looks like. So that the next time they look at a human colony and see something to take, they have a reference point. The room held that sentence. The buzzing light kept buzzing. Sorvin said, "Those are very small terms for a war." "Yes," Lena said. "You could ask for far more. Territory. Political status. Resource rights." "Yes," she said again. He looked at her. "Why don't you?" She met his eyes. "Because we don't want their territory. We want them to remember that they could have lost it." She stood, picked up her jacket from the back of the chair, and said she appreciated his time. She walked out. The buzzing light kept going after the door closed. Sorvin sat in the bad light for a long time. On the Meridian, Pam finished her shift at hour 22. She sat in the break room alone and ate a meal she would not have been able to name 20 minutes later. She was looking at the wall. Through the hull, the war was happening. Out there in the dark, the math was continuing to add up. She washed her tray. She went back in. Cal was awake when she checked Bay 7. He asked about his squad again. The same 3 names, the same order. She told him they were fine. She moved the 4 line so it sat a little more comfortably. She turned off the light above his bed. She told him to sleep. She walked to the next bay. The buzzing in her ears was not the light. It was just her own blood moving, which it had been doing all day, which it would keep doing, which was all she was asking of it. Back in the conflict zone, Nate Calloway received a message through a third-party diplomatic relay. The Zavari Dominion was requesting a ceasefire through unofficial channels. The language was careful. Formal. It used the word pause rather than cessation, and it did not include the word negotiate. Nate read the message. He forwarded it to Cole without comment. He went back to his tactical display. The fleet had 2 more objectives on its current path. He looked at the map. He thought about the names in his jacket pocket, which had more names on it than when the campaign began. He looked at the map. He told Dana to begin coordinating the next movement. She did. The same room. The same screens on every wall. The same 7 delegation platforms glowing in their colors. The same ceiling that went up so high you stopped looking for the top of it. 6 weeks had passed since Cole Hargrove had set a data chip on a podium and said 4 words that sent 3 translation matrices into error mode. In those 6 weeks, 2 Zavari supply corridors had been taken. 1 Dominion military station had been disabled. 11 engagements had gone one direction. The Zavari Dominion had requested a ceasefire through 4 separate back channels and received no response to any of them. Now the Dominion had requested formal cessation proceedings before the Galactic Council. The chamber was full. Not the controlled full of a normal session. Full in the way of a room where 300 beings all want to see the same thing and none of them are sure what that thing is going to look like. Cole Hargrove walked in. He still didn't sit. He stood at the center platform and waited while the session was formally opened. He looked the same as he had 6 weeks ago. Same posture. Same stillness. If 6 weeks of war had changed anything in him, it was not visible from the outside and he was not offering it to the room. Lena Farrow took her seat in the back row again. She looked at the same crystal water glass that had been sitting in front of her place every session, in the particular way of institutional spaces that maintain small consistencies as a kind of comfort. She looked at it for a moment. Then she opened her notes and did not look at it again. The Zavari delegation entered from the far side. The head delegate this time was a senior official named Voraz, older, careful in his movements. He had been sent specifically because he was the kind of person who did not lose composure easily. He sat and arranged his materials and kept his eyes on the table. Deros opened the session with the formal language the occasion required. He noted that humanity had been invited to present its terms for cessation. He said it in the neutral voice of someone who had decided that whatever happened next, his job was to hold the procedure together. Cole stepped forward. He did not have a long document. He did not have a prepared speech. He had a single page. He set it on the podium and read from it in the same level voice he had used 6 weeks ago for the declaration. The terms were as follows. The 17 colony worlds were to be returned to Earth, fully intact, with all infrastructure restored at Zavari expense. The timetable for this was 90 days. The Zavari Dominion was to enter into the formal record of the Galactic Council a written acknowledgement that the original annexation had been an unlawful act of aggression. There were no demands for Zavari territory. No resource rights. No political concessions beyond the acknowledgement. No reparations beyond the restoration of what had been taken. And one final provision, which Cole read slowly and did not rush through. Any Galactic Council member species that annexed a human colony world by force would be considered, from that moment and without any further declaration required, in a state of war with Earth. This provision was to be entered into standing council law and would apply to all member species, present and future. Cole folded the page. He set it on the podium. He waited. The chamber was very quiet. A Kethare delegate, not the one from 6 weeks ago, a different one, leaned toward his translation unit and said, "Is that all?" Cole looked at him. "That's all," he said. Voraz, the Zavari senior delegate, had been sitting with his eyes down since Cole began reading. Now he looked up. He looked at Cole the way you look at something you have been trying to understand and are still not sure you do. He said, "The Dominion expected more significant demands." Cole said, "I know. You could have asked for far more." Cole said, "Yes. So why didn't you?" The room waited. Cole looked at Voraz for a long moment. Not unkindly. Not with anger. With the expression of a man who is about to say something he has thought about carefully and has decided to say plainly. "Because we don't want what you have," he said. "We want you to know what it would have cost you." The silence that followed was not the stunned silence of 6 weeks ago. This was heavier. This was the silence of a room absorbing something that would not fit neatly into any existing category. Sorvin, seated in the second ring, wrote nothing. He just listened. Deros moved through the procedural requirements efficiently and without ceremony. The terms were entered into the session record. Voraz confirmed the Dominion's agreement on behalf of his government, his voice steady and professional throughout. The formal cessation documents were signed in the way these things were always signed, quietly, with very little drama, in a room that had already spent its drama. In the corridor afterward, Sorvin caught Cole before he reached the docking bay. He had not planned to. He had simply found himself walking in that direction. He said, "You could have taken so much more." The Dominion would have agreed to almost anything at this point. Cole stopped. He turned. He looked at Sorvin with the same expression he had worn for 6 weeks and which Sorvin had spent 6 weeks trying to find a name for. He said, "Yeah." He stood there a moment. "We didn't want more," he said. "We wanted them to know what more looks like. So that the next time someone in that government looks at one of our worlds and wonders, they'll remember they already found out." He turned and walked toward the bay. Sorvin stood in the corridor for a while after he left. He had brokered 43 treaties. He had advised governments and council delegates and built frameworks for peace between species that had been killing each other for generations. He had always operated from a core belief that rational actors, given clear information about costs and consequences, would choose the path that preserved the most for everyone. Humans had operated from that belief too, he realized. They just had a different definition of preservation. They were not interested in accumulating what they did not already have. They were interested in being left alone with what they had. And when that was threatened, they were willing to show the entire galaxy exactly what the cost of threatening it looked like, not to profit from the demonstration, but so that the demonstration would be remembered clearly. He walked back to his office. He opened his behavioral assessment file, the one he had been writing and deleting and rewriting for 6 weeks. He read all of it. He deleted none of it this time. He wrote a final section. He read that back too. He filed the report. He closed the file. On a hospital ship being rerouted away from the conflict zone, Pam Ochoa was finally off shift at a normal hour. She sat in the break room and ate dinner slowly and could actually taste it this time. Through the window she could see stars. They looked the same as they had always looked. She found that comforting in a way she didn't try to explain. Cal had been transferred to a recovery facility 2 days ago. She had checked the transfer record. His squad was listed. 3 names, the same ones he had asked about in the same order every time. All 3 were in the record as recovered. She ate the rest of her dinner. Somewhere on Earth, in a city that existed in a time zone no one at the council had ever looked up, Owen Park, a xenolinguist who had spent 6 years translating Veth poetry and had continued doing it throughout the war because the work still needed doing, finally finished the last poem in his collection. He printed the completed translation and pinned it on the wall where his working drafts had lived for 6 years. He looked at it for a while. He made coffee. He sat down. The galaxy outside his window was the same galaxy it had been the morning of the declaration. He knew that wasn't true. He drank his coffee anyway and read the poem again from the beginning, slowly, in a language built by a species that had spent 6 centuries learning how to broker peace, and he thought, there are many ways to say the same thing. He had found that to be generally true. He finished his coffee. He went to bed. Outside, the stars did what they always did. They kept going.